Welcome to the Ancient Way. I'm James.
I'm Marlia.
We have another guest with us. I say always our guests are special. We have a really good one today, Brian Godawa. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
And what the listeners don't know is that Brian helped us fix some of the echo in our sound and everything. I'm super grateful for it. A lot of people, when situations like that happen, whether it's like in work or anywhere, it's like intensity goes like starts to grow pretty rapidly. But I appreciate your patience for that. So anyways,
No
For
problem.
real though.
yeah.
Our last audio or our last guest, James and I couldn't even listen to it because the audio was so bad. We were like, ugh.
And it was like the only time it's ever happened.
Uh-huh.
But you can hear what we're saying. So it's like if you can persevere through a little bit, there is some really good stuff in it.
Well,
It happens.
Yeah.
yours is just gonna be better this time. It's just gonna be the level up.
Yeah, that's gonna be good.
All right. Well, let's jump into this.
Yeah.
Can you kind of give our listeners a little bit of who you are, kind of your story, your backstory, even how you stumbled upon? He is a brilliant writer. You're a screenwriter, did all the Hollywood stuff. So cool. But give us our listeners kind of the rundown of what got you into it. Kind of how did you jump into starting to write about the Nephilim and all of that?
Or like, yeah. And what inspired you to even start on this path? Like what sparked it?
I take it your listeners then are already quite familiar then with the whole Nephilim stuff.
Yes.
And
Oh, yeah.
giants and watchers and all that. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's our vein. This
Yeah.
is
Yeah. No,
we're
that's
kind of
fine.
crazy.
Yeah, you're one of the Nephilim nuts, as I call us.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Some are nuttier than others, though.
Very true.
But yeah. Well, well, how far do I go back? I was born in 19. I won't say. Anyway, I'm an artist, and I've always been an artist. I actually started out as a visual artist, but there was something about when I was younger. There was something about drama that drew me, and I loved movies so deeply that by the time I graduated with a graphic design career going forward, I had looked more and more into movies, and I just had a passion, desire to actually to screenwrite. And so I learned on my own. I didn't go to school for it, and still today that's very possible for writers. You have to do a lot of your own research and a lot of work and such, but it is possible to learn storytelling on your own and screenwriting on your own. But you really have to put a lot of work into it. So I kind of did it on the side for years. And my first, and I wrote for many years, pounded the pavement, just everything I could I even moved out to LA or shall we say Southern California, in order to be closer to that business, get to know Christians in that world, and get to know people in that world and such. And so I started my career in my pursuit of screenwriting. And my first movie got made in 2001, which was To End All Wars. And that starred Kiefer Sutherland. And that was a true story about prisoners of war, Allied prisoners of war under the Japanese in prison camps. And it was a true story. And it was kind of like, if you've seen the movie Bridge on the River Kwai, that was this was the true story that they didn't really show you,
And
Kwai
I would
was
highly recommend that movie, by the way. Excellent movie.
Yeah. I think it's free on Amazon Prime right now. But anyway, Kiefer Sutherland's best role, in my opinion, one of his best roles for sure. But that sort of launched my Hollywood career. And, but from that time on, I was more in the independent realm. Like I wasn't making big studio movies and such. And I think it's partly because of the content I'm interested in, the stories I'm interested in telling. I wanted to tell stories that would honor God or point to God in some way with a Christian worldview, but yet be a quote secular Hollywood movie. That was sort of my desire.
Yeah.
Like, for me, the paradigm was Chariots of Fire, which of course dates me. But I was honored when my movie 200 Wars came out, and even Eric Metaxas, I think, had said, yeah, this is the Chariots of Fire of the new generation type of thing, and that was exactly what my desire was.
Hmm.
But it didn't launch me into any kind of big success. I just continued to be struggling, writer, trying to make my movies, and I've written a few, also directed a few documentaries since then. But as time went on, though, I'd always been interested in theology, apologetics, and philosophy, and that as a Christian, I was Christian, from high school. So as a Christian, I I've always loved theology, and I've studied a lot of weird stuff and a lot of deep stuff that a lot of Christians just don't like to talk about because they're not
Hmm.
interested in theology. It's too intellectual, whatever. And I get it; it's not for everyone. But we have all different kinds of people in the body of Christ, and that's fine. But it was
Yeah.
definitely something that I really loved, and I studied, and I was able to teach a little bit here and there in churches, but not much because, like I say, people aren't. It's just weird stuff,
Hmm.
or just philosophical or whatever, theological. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So my interest in that is what kind of made me open to pursue unique things, unique ideas, and such. And there's a confluence of events in my life about, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe over 10 years ago now, where I came up with the idea to write a movie, a movie about a Bible story that would be something Hollywood would be interested in because it would be
Hmm.
fantastical and it would have supernatural things and it would be the ancient world, and Christians because it would be based on the Bible. I thought it would be a perfect fit. And it was called Noah Primeval. And I wrote the screenplay and I was trying to get interested in it. And then I found out Darren Aronofsky was making his Noah movie. And I thought, oh, well,
Hmm.
I mean, he's an accomplished filmmaker. I'm really a nobody in Hollywood. So I realized, okay, if I want to get my story out, I'm going to have to do it another way. And I had always thought I would eventually be writing novels when I couldn't get movies made anymore. And I had a couple bad years, low years where I didn't make any money in my
Yeah.
screenwriting. So I thought, okay, now's the time to do the novel and get it out. And sure enough, I did. I wrote the novel, Noah Primeval. And that was, like I said, over a decade ago. And the interesting thing was in my research for that, I had stumbled upon Michael Heiser, and this was before Michael Heiser was famous. And in
Hmm.
fact, he was writing his book, what became The Unseen Realm, at that time, but he had it online. Like, as he
Hmm.
was writing it, he had the chapters online available because he didn't realize or think that it might become as popular as it is. And so I stumbled upon that, and it blew my mind because here was a Bible scholar who believed in the Bible still, and as a basic evangelical, he believed in the Bible, but yet he also explored those weird things in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, for me, in my life, the weirdest passage in the Bible had always been Genesis 6, 1-4, about the Nephilim and the
Hmm.
sons of God mating with the daughters of men. So, but as a Christian, I believe in the Bible, but it doesn't mean I always understand it. And I would go, man, that's really weird. And, whatever. I couldn't understand it. So I would just sort of gloss over it, as well as some other weird things. And, maybe one day I will understand it when I get time to study, right? Well, when I was doing the research for the Noah story, I got the chance to dive
Yeah.
in, and
Mm-hmm.
my mind was blown because, not only, did I start to understand, how should we say, uh, to seek to understand the Bible within its original ancient Near Eastern context. And what I
Hmm.
mean by that is what Christians so often do, even today, those who believe in the Bible, um, tend to read the Bible through their own lenses of the modern world, and they don't realize it. They just read
Mm-hmm.
the stuff and they think, and they come up with their theology to explain it, but they don't realize that there's a whole ancient background for what's going on there. And
Yeah.
a lot of it is rooted in, and in order to understand that background, you have to understand the ancient Near Eastern culture that was surrounding Israel at the time, because they were a part of their world just like we are. If we as Christians have been influenced, whether we know it or not, whether we think so or not, we've been influenced by, Enlightenment, rationalism, scientism, you know, uh, Einsteinian worldview, theory of relativity.
Hmm.
It's seeped into all these elements of worldviews are very much a part of our time, whether they're true or not. And as we know, these worldviews do change over time, and so in their ancient world, removed from us by thousands of years, and their language is doing things that we don't even know about cultural context wise. But the problem is that evangelical Christians have often had a hard time in considering ancient Near Eastern cultures around them because they're fearful that they believe that the Bible exists in a vacuum of its own interpretation. They believe that the Bible cannot have any connection with the quote pagan world around them, because
Yeah.
if they do, then they believe that's going to discredit the Bible. And in one way I can say, okay, that's honorable intentions, but in that fear and in that desire to elevate the Bible, they're actually denigrating the Bible, and they're actually colonializing the text into their own modern worldview without even realizing it. Because if you
Hmm.
don't take it in its ancient context and try to understand what they meant to their people in that time, you are going to interpret it through your sense in your time.
Oh yeah.
And so this is so fundamental, because even to this day, I still interact with people, many Christians, bless their hearts, but they just don't get it. And they just,
Mm-hmm.
they attack me for what I'm saying or whatever. And they're like,
Yeah.
I just take the Bible literally. I mean, I can't say how many times Christians have done this. And it's just like, they have
Hmm.
no clue. They're completely divorced from reality. They don't even
Yeah.
realize that their so-called literalness is actually not literalness. It's just modern way of interpreting the text,
Hmm.
because anyone who knows literature knows that literature and stories and narratives are full of symbols,
Yes.
literal historical events, but also symbols, interpretations, etc., and
Hmm.
imagery and poetry, and all this stuff is integrated, so that even if a person's writing about history, for example, in the Old Testament, they might be writing about a historical event, but they're using very poetic and very symbolic imagery to do so, and
Yeah.
so Christians just don't understand that, and in so doing, they're really corrupting. Their own viewpoint is corrupting the biblical text
Hmm.
into a
Mm-hmm.
modern, twisted form of it, and it's really sad. So I
Yeah.
did that. I looked into that, and at first, when you do, I also know it's this notion that. The liberal scholarship, if you keep track of critical scholarship and the history of it, you see that, yeah, critical scholarship did often focus on trying to make the Bible look like it was just like every other literature of its day,
Yeah.
and they stole from ancient pagans,
Yeah.
and they tried to use that to say, see, the Bible is just another mythology.
Yeah.
But the evangelicals did the other fatal flaw. By the way, and so in doing so, they completely ignore the unique individual cultural context that Israelites do in fact bring to the text. And I would
Yeah.
argue the God of Israel brings that to the text, which of course
Yes.
they don't believe in. So they don't believe that there's a God really behind it all, right? So you can
Hmm.
see how the liberals will spin in that one direction, but then evangelicals or conservative Christians spin the other way just as bad, because they'll deny all that, and they'll just say, well, no, it's just this literal way, the way I interpret it to mean. And what they're doing the same thing liberals are doing. Actually, they don't realize it, I think, but they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so the ability to understand, well, how do you interpret the text within their time period to the people they were writing, and both acknowledge these connections to the pagan culture around them, but also understand and acknowledge, but there is differences. Obviously, there's differences. Why else would Isaiah mock the gods? Because he
Yeah.
Yeah.
doesn't believe in them, but he still uses imagery from Baal, imagery from Molech, and
Yeah.
in the way that they describe a lot of things. So this is a fundamental hermeneutical principle that I think most Christians are just stumbling on because they don't get it. And that was the thing that launched me into understanding the whole divine council worldview that, as Mike Heiser had communicated,
Yeah.
and that involves the Nephilim and giants and such, and that also, again, as a Christian, it was a difficult thing to face when you really do put the Bible above your ability to reason, or when you really do put the Bible above what you think. That means when you discover the Bible says something, no matter how shocking it is, you have to accept it because the Bible is superior to us. And so when you really have that view, there are things you end up having to face that evangelical Christians don't. For example, the fact that the Bible does say there are other gods.
Yeah.
Now, yes, we get that immediate, oh, but the Bible's monotheistic, and and therefore, and there can't be any other gods. Well, yes, to some degree, I would agree with that. But the modern understanding of monotheism isn't biblical, actually, because the Bible actually does use the word Elohim, which means gods, of both Yahweh and other divine beings, for instance, around his divine council, or these sons of God that are also called gods. That's in Psalm 82 as a classic example. Mike Heiser brings that as a great example. In fact, I've written a book called Psalm 82 that really explains all that. You're going to hear me reference a lot of books as I'm talking because I'm a book writer, and I
love
like
it.
to.
Good.
If you want to understand more, you got to look down other pathways, and that's a good introduction to all this stuff. But this is this theological thing that once you start to realize, okay, I take the Bible over my evangelical beliefs, even then you realize, okay, the Bible does talk about other gods. Now, does that mean it's a pantheism or polytheism? No, not at all. I mean, or even henotheism, because yes, Yahweh is incomparable to the other gods, which means that in essence, he's not at all like them. Whereas polytheism and henotheism, these belief systems, they do believe there are high gods, but they believe they're just as much a part of that pantheon, and they fight and work, jockey for power. Baal has to jockey for power to rise to the top of the pantheon under El, but then even he gets enough power to operate separately from El. But that's not at all how the Bible talks. It's not polytheistic.
Oh, yeah.
There is the one creator, infinite, eternal, all Trinity God. Yeah. And the gods he creates are these other heavenly beings that then some of them, Bible talks about some sons of God that fall and mate with daughters of men, create these hybrid monsters called Nephilim, these giants. And what's that all about? Well, that's got an actual theological thread throughout the Bible. It's not just a strange anomaly. And when I discovered that strange, that thread, that was when I got so excited. I thought, oh my gosh, there's a series of books here I can write, not just Noah Primeval, but I can write about Enoch and a couple of others. I could get 3 or 4 novels out of this. Well, now I've got like 16 novels later, still going. And so what my goal was when I discovered this was I wanted to retell Bible stories that did feature the Nephilim or the Watchers. And we can explain that in a minute, I guess. But and this theological thread. And so that's where I started picking the specific stories where there was some direct reference, at least, to these giants or Watchers to some degree. And that's what my Chronicles of the Nephilim is that series of novels. And then over the years, I didn't tell all the stories, but I got to the end, which was the last book, was Jesus Triumphant. And I realized there's more to tell here because I actually do believe, I thought, the book of Revelation is one of the most supernatural books in the whole, New Testament. And I have a different viewpoint of what most popular Christians believe about that. But nevertheless, I acknowledge there's a lot of supernatural elements. I thought, that I'm not done yet because I have to do a series on that book. And so I wrote Chronicles of the Apocalypse, which brings in the same motifs from Nephilim, but it's in the context of the first century when John was writing the book of Revelation and when he had that vision.
Yep.
And so I tell the history of Neronic persecutions and all the events that led up to the destruction of Jerusalem and the Holy Temple in AD 70. And then I realized there are still some stories that I skipped over in the Old Testament that do have Watchers in them or something similar. So I started Chronicles of the Watchers, which is sort of like filling in the holes of Nephilim. So my latest novel was Moses Against the Gods of Egypt. And that tells the story, of
Cool.
course,
Yeah.
of Moses. And, you know, there's a really cool passage in there where the reason why I told that story was there's a passage in Exodus where God says, I will execute my judgments upon the gods of Egypt.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, whoa. So there's that sort of inference of some demonic reality to that. So
Mhm.
that's what launched me in my novels, you know. And
Mm.
I had been writing, movies for a long time, and I just recently moved out to Texas because Hollywood has gone so woke that
Yeah.
it's not just you can't. I used to fly in under the radar with our little
Yeah.
movies, and you find a distributor that will distribute it, but
Sure.
now they're just hunting out people like me,
Yeah.
victimizing us and
Yep.
not working with us, firing us, and
Right.
particularly white middle-aged males and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So they're so extremely woke that I knew that they would also demand every story would now have to be this leftist woke worldview, and
Oh yeah.
I could not tolerate that.
It's
So
in everything. Yeah.
yeah, so
Well,
I'm still making movies, but
yeah.
and I've always been, like I said, I've always been making independent movies, but it enabled me to get out of Los Angeles and get away from
Sure.
Yeah.
the horror that is Southern California. As
Yeah.
much as it's a beautiful state and for terms of the environment, whatever, but
Definitely.
it's horrifying.
I have a handful of specific questions. First off, welcome to Texas.
For real. Welcome to the party.
live in Texas. um, Another one that I do want to send on, and I've tried to articulate it a little bit, and I'll butcher it. Speaking of context and us reading the Bible through modern context, through denominations, the Book of Revelation, that one in the 70 AD destruction of Jerusalem, that is a huge one. And
Yeah,
I read a
it's
book,
very
I think it was
huge.
called Raptureless, and it's like, oh my gosh, did
Oh
this
yeah,
happen? Was that fulfilled in what Jesus said in Matthew?
24.
Yeah.
24. Yeah,
And it lines up so perfectly. And he's the one that prophesied it, and it came true. And
yeah.
that is brilliant. And that's another one that is very widely, very widely, probably mass majority of like applying our own filters to that,
Oh
applying it
yeah.
to us now. And it's like, it looks to me like a lot of that happened.
I think the most fundamental misunderstanding in most of the Christians is this, like I say, I call it a sort of post-enlightenment scientific mindset where
Yeah.
they just don't understand prophecy. They really believe that prophecy is literal. And it's just
Yeah.
absurd to me because if you study the literary nature, not literal, but the literary nature
Mhm.
of prophecy throughout the Bible, it's clearly symbolic from
Yeah.
beginning to end. And yes, it symbolizes actual historical events,
Yep.
but it's symbolism of something and it's the spiritual reality of things.
Yeah.
And so when you get things like, well, stars fall from the sky and the sky will roll up like a scroll, that's literal.
Yeah.
They think like you don't believe in the Bible if you say, actually that's symbolic. And I've done massive studies and I've written books on it.
Yeah.
End Times Bible Prophecy is a book that you can get on Amazon. But
Cool.
just for example, the symbolism in prophecy, yes, it refers to specific historical events, but it's symbolic. So if you have
Yeah.
stars falling from the sky, you have sky rolling up like scroll. Well, actually, if the sky rolled up like a scroll, people, the universe would be completely destroyed. So that's
Yeah.
there's no such thing as that. And when you look into the Old Testament and you see there are actual events in the past, the God overthrowing Edom, God overthrowing Egypt, God overthrowing
Mhm.
Babylon, and God overthrowing Jerusalem in 586 BC. All of those events are
Yes.
described using sky rolling up like a scroll, the moon turning blood red. It's
Yeah.
it's 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 imagery. The stars in the ancient world, you got to understand this. They understood the stars as divinities
Yeah.
or divine. And for them, those heavenly bodies were expressions of spiritual reality. So they used them to describe if a nation was falling under the armies of another, they would describe it as the powers falling from the sky because the
Yeah.
powers on earth were connected to the powers in heaven. And so for the powers on earth to be overtaken by other armies would be like stars falling from the sky. And they actually
Yeah.
believed that, like remember Daniel, right? Daniel, what is it?
Yeah.
10, Prince of Persia and Prince of Greece. It's right there. It's like when there's a battle on earth, there's a battle in heaven. So that connection's going on.
It's cool.
And so it's so cool. And in some ways, it opens up the beauty of scripture that you've never seen before. And it makes this literalism fantasy of Christians. I don't mean to be insulting. I don't, but it's like adolescent or infantile because they have no understanding of the nature of literature. And it's just so sad to me. And I'm saying this because I'm interacting with a lot of it now as I try to sell my books, and people go and they interact. And anyway, so that's been a long-term struggle.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, Jesus, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, one, I think it's really cool that I feel like it's kind of like a forerunner of like going ahead, because I do think that more and more people are going to awaken up to this true reality, even if they're not there yet. But I've been having that conversation with several people lately, especially about the book of Revelation, because I'm like, if you think about it, what it actually is the revelation of Jesus Christ, not the revelation of all the end. It's like, it's all prophetically revealing who he is, the testimony that he paid, everything that he paid for. And I mean, even his birth, like Revelation 12 is literally his birth in the sky. Anyways, but
it's also like the axis of the reality of like Jesus is the Ancient of Days. Like it's a clash of it all. And what's beautiful too is like Jesus spoke in parables. There are imagery and words. I mean, those kind of things that speak far deeper than any words or sentences.
Well, a picture is like 1,000 words.
Yeah, that old thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's like you can get points across like that in stories. Yes.
Stories communicate theology. Here's something that in my personal journey as a Christian, I've also written a book about called The Imagination of God, because as a Christian, I've always been heavily influenced by apologetics from the beginning. I've loved it. And that influenced and affected the way I approached my faith, which is fine because I often learned true doctrine through studying what was the false lies out there, from apologetics, right?
Yeah.
And so that's all good. But what I realized it had created in me was this very modernistic, rationalistic, intellectualized faith. And I'm not speaking as a charismatic, because I'm not a charismatic. So I don't mean that. What I mean is not that you need to have the emotions, but you need to have the imagination understanding in your faith. And so I become so intellectualized and such that I was misunderstanding that, and I went back and I've studied and sought to understand the nature of storytelling and such, because that's what I am. And finding out that the Bible is about, you could say 20, 30% propositional truth, like this is a doctrinal truth. And about 70 to 80%, it's actually story, poetry, imagery, imagination. And that's what I say is that it's more imagination. So therefore, I'm not against systematic theologies. I'm not against rational theology. The postmoderns will say, reason is a tool of white supremacy. And, that's absurd insanity. What I'm saying is I had experience that C.S. Lewis himself had also experienced, because I found out when I studied up on him, and it's basically you when you worship reason, you don't realize it until your mind gets more open to the imagination. And then you realize the limits of reason. Reason is good, it's a tool, but it's very limited in terms of communicating truth. And as human beings, we are both logical, rational beings. We are rational beings for sure, but we are also relational and imaginative beings. And that's why I came to the conclusion that God tells most of his theology through stories, not through systematic theology.
Yeah.
Very little at all. Maybe you can say Romans is kind of systematic, but even then it's storytelling. And so again, this isn't either or, but I realized how much it's been inverted. Evangelical Christianity and my Christianity had been more rationalistic, and I did not. I accepted imagination because I was an artist, of course, but I didn't realize, it's not just that it's acceptable; it's that God uses it more than He uses propositional, rational argumentation, right? And so, therefore, to me, as you hinted at, Jesus chose to use parables because they do communicate truth much deeper and mysterious in a way that reason cannot access. And there's some aspects of truth that are that way. They're not, we cannot grasp it as if we can control it, as if we can own a truth. And so storytelling allows you to embody it within the human experience.
Yeah.
And then that's how the theology is actually communicated. And by the way, like I said, I've studied theology, so I love it too. But my novels became God's way of offering me the opportunity to communicate all that theology, that all that intellectual knowledge that I had, and to embody it into stories. And so in some ways, I'm grateful to him because that's what my novels do. You read my novels, you'll get a lot of theology actually in there,
Cool. Yeah.
but it's incarnate within the story. And I think that's what will make it more sensible to people. And I have lots of people responding saying, you've given me, I was getting bored with the Bible and it was dry, but you've made it come alive for me again. And I'm going back to the Bible, to the Bible and rereading with fresh eyes. Or like the whole, like you mentioned with the Revelation and stuff like that. It's like, you can look, this is the power of Left Behind, right? Left Behind sold gazillions. Well, that theology had been around for a long time and, they were making money off of it, but why was Left Behind so successful? It wasn't because it was true, and it wasn't because it was great story. It was good storytelling. I won't deny that, but there's a lot of weaknesses to it. But the point was, it made that theology that can tend to be a little bit like deep, and people can't grasp it. When you show the charts and all that stuff, but when you live it out through the characters experiencing it, it makes the theology come alive, and that's why I think the power of it was. And that's what I hope and pray that my series, Chronicles of the Apocalypse, will do with my viewpoint, which is very unique or very, it's not the major viewpoint is the Left Behind view, right?
Right.
And I just for people who are wondering, I didn't do it to mimic Left Behind. I did it to be a conclusion of the series I'd been writing for a decade.
Yeah.
So my goal wasn't to mimic Left Behind at all.
No.
It was just, but as I was approaching it, I realized, this is the power of eschatology in narrative form can do much more, can be much more effective at times. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
We always say like our imagination is the screen in which God communicates, right? And I think it's the place of faith. It's where faith is actually accessed. It's where you actually can pull from his reality and bring it into this domain. And that's literally what you did,
I agree.
And I think our imagination is brilliant. I think it's far underrated. Because it is our connection to him. It is.
I'm sorry. What's cool about it too is like the reason and the imagination. We are this unique creation of God's that are like spiritual realm, physical realm combined. So we're like in both, so it's like you have the representation of the gods on this side and we're on this side, but like we're this rare new creation of both of them that can walk hand in hand. And I think that maybe the goal is like,
it absolutely is the goal. In fact, even think about it. Christ, who is our theological center point, right?
Yeah.
What was he? The Word made flesh, right?
Totally.
He's the perfect. He's not just God and not just man. He's God and man equally. And in the same sense, he's also, I think, I can't remember if it's Galatians or Ephesians that says he is the exact image of God. And the image is the same word that was used for idols. So people say, well, but the imagination is dangerous. Look at the Bible has, warnings against making images because man's imagination leads to idolatry. Visual leads to idolatry. Yeah, visual can lead to idolatry. And there's danger in it. But excuse me, who's done more damage to the entire history of mankind other than words written in books like Origin of the Species, Freud, Nietzsche, Marx? Their books of words have actually destroyed the world. That what we're in right now is a result of their words, not pictures, right? So don't tell me that imagination is dangerous. It's no more dangerous than reason is, and certainly no more dangerous than words. In fact, words can be far more dangerous and just as manipulative. So this is both and, not an either or thing anyway. So you're absolutely right, I think, but I do think that we need the balance of that imagination because we become imbalanced in the rational side of things. And we can do that. We can find balance without jettisoning reason, which is what the postmodern does, right? Or the deconstructionists, the postmodern church is actually doing that. So they're wrong
One thing
too.
Yeah.
Totally. One thing I love that you said though is about like the human experience, the embodiment of emotion. It's like, yeah, you have reason, but if you don't have an experience like the emotion to attach to it, you haven't. That's only head knowledge. You have not embodied anything, and
Yeah.
we're actually his embodiment.
Body
And
of
it's
the
like,
story.
Yeah.
well, part of the story. It's like, yo, if you can feel the emotions that Jesus even went through and like the joy set before him that he endured the cross, it's like, dude, if you can tap into that, you'll embody what he paid for. You'll embody all these things. But it's, if you don't have the emotion, it's only head knowledge. It's only reason. It's only, I feel like, turns into debate, to be honest,
Yeah.
because I feel like that's all people do is
Yeah,
debate and try and deconstruct.
Well,
And it's like, that's pointless to me,
Yeah.
honestly.
And in terms of imagination too, it's like the Bible says we have the mind of Christ.
Mhm.
What does that involve? I would say imagination.
Yeah,
If
totally.
it's his, it's like,
Imagination.
oh my gosh, that's one of the
Yeah.
biggest things I think that he did that we don't see that often is like he said, it's better that I go away.
Mhm.
Because why? Because I'm like, I'm giving you my heart. I'm giving you my mind. I'm giving you my imagination,
Yeah.
which is incredible to just sit and think about that. It's like he's in our thoughts. He's that
Mhm.
close.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
I love that, man.
Well said. Yeah.
So-
So along those lines, then, the incorporating, integrating imagination and is key, but it's sort of like I've kind of always been a bipolar sort of person in analogously speaking, in that I've always been a creative type with imagination and an apologetics type Christian.
Yeah.
So I've always had that intellectual and imaginative, but they kind of had separate existences. I did my art and I believe it was acceptable to God, but in terms of seeking to understand God, I only sought to use my reason. And so when you incorporate understanding God through your imagination, that's where you also have to allow for mystery. I
Yeah.
think, and it's dangerous. Absolutely, it's dangerous. But having a harmonious sort of integration of those is what allows you to, I think, have that balanced interaction with God. So, what I'm saying is we read about various components of our faith in scripture. We read, come let us reason together, says the Lord. Sure. You've got doctrinal truth, you've got even emotional. But I think that what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that imagination is an acceptable component. I'm saying if we don't understand that, we don't have a full picture of God. We are lacking in our understanding of God himself. And so that's why I think it's that important, And so what does this mean, imagination? What is it? It's just a term, right? But it's like, no, it's learning to incorporate storytelling. I remember when I studied apologetics, I, of course, accepted personal testimony as being a legitimate thing because, of course, there's personal testimonies in the Bible, right? The woman at the well, she went and told what Christ did, and people got saved, and so it's acceptable. But when it really came down to it, when you're defending the faith and you're preaching the gospel, it's like technically, according to logical argumentation, personal testimonies are subjective and therefore not really good arguments, because a Hindu can give their personal testimony, a Muslim can give theirs. And so it's subjective, so it doesn't really have the weight that logic has. That's one example of kind of like the results of that kind of thinking. And now it's inverted in my mind because I now realize, no. Telling people what God has done in your life is God in action, in history. It's the story of God. It's the story of God in life. And that actually has the most profound impact on people, I think.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not saying you don't reason. I'm just saying I flip-flopped the priority of these things. And now I value personal testimony and stories about God as being very relevant.
Interesting.
And not only very relevant, but crucial to sharing. Now, the gospel is a specific, I think, has a specific doctrinal elements to it for sure. But again, when you're embodying that salvation narrative in your life story, you're communicating the gospel in an existential way. And that's what people really connect to. So yeah, that's kind of where I become. And of course, as a storyteller,
That's cool.
that's my thing. And that's why I'm, in fact, I wrote a book many years ago called Hollywood Worldviews. And in that book, that was when I was developing what I call my aesthetic. In philosophy, you have an ethic, you have a metaphysic, but you also have an aesthetic, which means a theory of beauty. And so, we read about things in the Bible. I mentioned this earlier, God's reason, God's glory, it's such, but it also talks about the beauty, like the beauty of his holiness, right? And that's sort of a throwaway line for most of us, I think, in our culture. Yeah, guys, but it's like, no, beauty is a crucial component of understanding God.
Yeah.
And that needs to be incorporated in of course, in everything we're doing. And so my storytelling becomes that means of doing that. And so back to Hollywood Worldviews. I was losing my track there. So Hollywood Worldviews I was developing my aesthetic, and I was studying screenwriters as they talked about the structure of storytelling, and I came to realize, oh my gosh, these godless storytellers teaching storytelling don't realize that what they're describing is the paradigm of redemption, and it doesn't mean it's Christian redemption, but it is the sort of like transcendent description of what conversion is. Now, it could be conversion to humanism, conversion to Islam, but it's conversion. And that itself is an embodiment that the gospel can be expressed through. Yeah. And so that's where I wanted to help Christians to see that, I think there's a lot less of it today than back in the day when I wrote it, but I tended to see Christians reacting two different extreme ways to movies and television and such. Because storytelling is so much a part of our culture, right? But it was because they would see the sex and the violence, for example, it would just throw the baby out with bathwater. It's like, nope, sex and violence, it's godless and all this. And they were missing deeper points that were going on here. Yes, there is some excessive sex and violence, and you have to consider that. But biblically speaking, the Bible is full of sex and violence. Yep. And so intrinsically having sex and violence in your storytelling is not wrong. It's just a question of how do you deal with it. And that's what makes it right or wrong. But just simply having sex and violence is not bad. It's actually how God tells his stories, right? So I wanted Christians to be able to have more intelligent, discerning way of how they're approaching movies so that they could see what's being done to them. But there's the other side of the equation, which were Christians who consider themselves free in Christ or something, or they would just say, that's just entertainment. So what's the big deal, right? It's not affecting me. And they don't realize that a story, not only is it a conversion or a redemption story, but it embodies a worldview. And so when you are going along in the journey with the hero and you're rooting for the hero, you don't realize that you're actually opening yourself up to the storytelling or let's say you're opening yourself up to the worldview of the storytellers, because that's what they're inculcating in it. And that's not all bad, because there's no perfect, there's nothing perfect in art. So a thing doesn't have to be exclusively Christian to have truth in it, right? So like, for instance, if you could have a good story about marriage in today's world, to me, like one of my favorite movies of all time is Jerry Maguire, still to this day. It's like, it's just a positive movie about marriage in a culture that rejects marriage, right? Yeah. To me, that's very Christian worldview, even if it's not a Christian movie, right? And so I wanted to help Christians to discern those differences so they could see the good and see the bad and see what they're trying to convince them, what the storytellers are trying to convince you of. And then that discernment allows you to be more protected from the messages. You can say, here's what they were trying to do. They're trying to communicate a, anti-Christian message to this or that, or, whatever, but that doesn't make it all bad, but it doesn't make it all good. So if you are discerning, you can discern the good from the bad. And at some point, the bad overwhelms the good. And maybe you turn off the movie or stop watching the series, but you don't throw it out just like that for the fact that it has some bad stuff in it. I mean, do you walk out of any sermon that you disagree with? You have some disagreements. I mean, I'm not talking about heresy, but I'm just saying, you have strong disagreements with the pastor. You walk out, you unfriend non-Christians because they don't believe what no, you interact with them. And that's part of the culture, is interacting with it. And so if, my goal was to teach Christians to be more discerning in what they're watching. And I do think a lot of Christians are more so that today, obviously, but but so that when you go to the office on Monday morning, you're talking about, well, what movies did you watch on the weekend or whatever, right? You
Yeah.
won't just say, oh yeah, I like that movie. No, I didn't like that movie. Oh, oh, that was cool action or whatever. You can actually say, well, here's what I liked about the movie. I like how they stressed good marriage, but what I didn't agree with was how they, they poked fun at the Christians or something like that. And
Yeah.
that gives you the ability to interact with the culture and the people around you and bring the gospel to people, because I think the gospel is applicable to every movie I watch,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's either in line or not
yeah.
in line with the gospel
Yeah.
in some way, and that's how I judge it.
Yeah. I feel the
Mhm.
same way. I can't watch anything without considering the gospel in it. Yeah, that's with music too. One example of a movie though, and this one shocked me. It's like every time I go into it, either consciously or subconsciously, I'm like, themes will speak to me. The Whale. Have you seen The Whale?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so.
That one is this horrible situation, awful situation, but toward the end of it, this one dude's he basically clings to like, I love this person through the whole time, no matter what. And out of all the darkness and things in this
Oh,
movie,
yeah, I have seen The Whale. I have
okay.
seen, I'm sorry. The one
Yeah,
with
no.
Brendan Fraser. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, uh-huh.
I was
But
thinking
it's
of a
like
literal whale. Okay, yeah, yeah.
at the end of it, if you've seen it, I don't want to spoil it, but it's like there's this one string through the whole movie that I'm like, all that dark stuff, all the situation, everything, it was worth it for that redemptive string in it that gets pulled at the very end of it.
Yeah.
I was like, that I felt that. We'll go back to Darren Aronofsky.
Yeah.
I think
And yet,
I think he's anyways.
yeah, no, he's a very spiritual person. He's a pagan,
Yeah.
but he
Oh,
loves
interesting.
and he's a avowed atheist. He said so. And he
Oh,
said his
wow.
Noah movie was a parable of environmentalism. He believes that the original sin
Oh.
was the original sin is whatever, polluting the environment, right? And so
Yeah, interesting.
he spun
Wow.
that.
Weird fun.
This
Yeah.
would be Whale's a good example, I think, but it's also helpful for us to recognize, but there is an anti-Christian thread throughout that story as well of the whale,
Right.
and making Christians look bad. But the ability is to point
Yep.
out both of those is where the discussion takes place. And it's like, oh, I didn't
Yeah.
see that, but I appreciate what you're saying. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Because see,
Mm.
there's also the side of I think there's a kind of, because of the ability to appreciate movies and series and such.
Yeah.
There's another sort of thread of Christians who sort of see the gospel in everything, even when it's not really there, or
Yeah.
shall we say, and the Babylon Bee does a lot of these kind of jokes about that, like,
Yeah.
for me, the classic was The Matrix. It's like, oh yeah,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
Jesus, it's Christ, it's a Christ story. Neil's
Uh-huh.
the Christ story and all this stuff. And it was a Christ story, by the way. But I
Yeah.
wrote a whole article on that. You can get it at my blog if you look it up.
Cool.
But on the Matrix series, and unfortunately, it was a Christ story, but it was a deliberate subversion of the Christ story. They were using the imagery of the imagery that we're all familiar with in our culture to invest it with new meaning. And ultimately, it was about self-salvation, not being saved by an external God or something, but it's
Yeah.
saving yourself. And Christ becomes the avatar for saving yourself. And the filmmakers were Nietzscheans. Literally, they admitted they're Nietzscheans and they're subverting it.
Interesting.
So it's helpful to see the Christ imagery, but to also see, yes, but here's where they're twisting it and communicating something different. And I think that goes on in a lot of movies too, because there are a lot of Christ stories. Some of them are basically
Yeah.
good, and I don't, I'm happy to see those kinds of stories, but we
Yeah.
also have to have nuance in our understanding. But are they utilizing that Christ story for a different redemption, or is it pointing in the right direction? That's all I would, that's what I
Interesting.
would say.
Where do you, with all the agenda and things like that in movies today, you can't get away from it. I don't watch movies anymore. I'm not invested. I've tried, and I've told my wife, I'm like, all right, I'm going to try this one more. Haven't seen Indiana Jones, and I love Raiders of the Lost Ark, talking about biblical, I love Raiders. But where do you see it going? Because I feel like it's going to collapse under itself. What do you see the future of film in the,
Well,
and in Christianity too? I mean, like
Yeah,
for us, like,
yeah, it is definitely collapsing. I think Hollywood is. I don't think that it. Okay, so how can I put it? So, like, you've heard of the latest Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs movies.
Yeah.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now, because of their wokeism, they don't want to make the dwarves, so they're just there's one dwarf, but the six other ones are like different people of color and all this kind of stuff, and they're normal
Yeah.
sized peoples. And of course, no white can't be a white person because that's evil. Whites people are racist. So, and I hope to God, and I suspect that will probably be the biggest flop that Disney will have had because of that.
Yeah.
And you've heard the phrase "go woke, go broke." Well, it's kind of true,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's true, but it's not always true. And the truth is that yes, people react negatively at the beginning, but
Mhm.
if you just keep pumping them with it, they end up accepting it
Yeah.
in the long run, and that's
Right.
good or bad. Case in point, when the whole look at how homosexuality is in our culture. Homosexuality, 30, 40 years ago was not an acceptable public sort of storytelling element, certainly, right, in movies. But slowly, piece by piece, step by step, they would introduce a hint or this or that, and then you had Will and Grace come on, and they played with the stereotypes of the fey gay guy and made us laugh at him. But in the long run, it made us love him because in the end, he was a sincere individual, and they were just
Mhm.
normalizing the homosexuality to the point where now almost every series has to have gay sex in there, not just a gay kiss or gay reference, but gay sex.
Well, it's like
And
a
so,
requirement now, right?
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But look at how it started. Yeah, when it first started, when they first put the first, we're talking mainstream movies because obviously there's always extreme fringe stuff that's going on. But
Sure.
mainstream movies, it was like hint, it'd be hint that these two have a relationship. But then the first kiss, and I mean, there's different cases where that occurred, but it was just a kiss, just to
Yeah.
make the point. And so what I'm getting at is, there's a lot of reaction against wokeism now, but you know what? If they just keep pushing it, I hate to admit it, but I think human nature is so weak, and Christians, I think, are so weak in their understanding of their faith that I think it will just become an acceptable. It could be not. It doesn't have to be, but it could just become an acceptable. Just like all immorality, step by step by step, it becomes accepted. And so, unless we really, try to remain consistent
Yeah.
and there's to some degree, again, we live in the world, but not of it. But if you live in
Sure.
the world, you have to have some interaction with this stuff, or
Yeah.
you have no connection to the humans around you, right? So I'm sorry, I don't
Right.
watch anything. I'm watching a lot less stuff now too because of the
Yeah.
woke stuff. I'm just not interested. It's just like
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not interested in all female action movies, female assassins. It's a joke, and it's like, oh, I know what you watch all Tom Cruise movies because Tom Cruise will. There's still some wokeness in some elements, but it's still a good, strong, leading masculine action hero guy,
Yeah.
So I too am watching fewer and fewer of it because I'm just not
Yeah.
interested in that garbage. But I mean,
One
I'm still
thing-
watching some things, and I still
Sure.
interact with them, and I'm not, I don't, I don't care if there's homosexuals in a movie, but
Sure.
when you see what they're doing and how they're normalizing it, and now they require it, it has
Yeah.
to be in there.
Mhm.
That's when it becomes more diabolical, certainly,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the one thing that's really, I've just become tired of it. I'm like, it's not even about story anymore. It's not even I can't even see a good story anymore.
You're right.
Or with
You're
good
right.
characters. That's devoid now. And I remember, I put in like a film grant years ago where a screenplay that I wrote, and this foundation corp, whoever said, hey, yeah, this isn't what the world needs right now. And then I got beat out by a story about a 50-year-old mother who won a twerking competition. My story got beat by that, which is like, man, it was almost sad to me. But then I'm like, I don't really feel bad. I'll just go do my own thing. But it's devoid of story. And I think that's the most powerful thing. And so that's why I can't watch him anymore.
I agree.
Do you
I do agree.
Yeah. Do you think that there will be pockets of, I don't know, independent filmmakers? I don't know fully what it looks like. Do you think there will be pockets that come out with movies that people are like, oh, what a relief, a good story?
Well, they already are.
Yeah.
But by the way, that's the one upside of this. So I've always had the
Yeah.
vision in the past of I wanted to go into Hollywood, be in the world, but not of it, create
Yeah.
Hollywood movies, but have a Christian worldview, right? I wanted to interact with that world, and really, but and I've never wanted to I never respected Christian movies. They're just so poorly written, poorly acted, poorly everything.
Yeah.
We
But
often watch faith films.
Faith-based Fridays.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And but I have to say, what this complete attack upon everyone who's not leftist in Hollywood has forced good filmmakers who I know some of the producers, who they used to be able to make movies and like they left Hollywood. And
Yeah.
so we have what's called the parallel economy concept. Now, that's always been out there, but I've never
Yeah.
believed in it because it's like, there's no money. You can't get movies made. They're small, and you can actually get better movies made. But now they're not letting those of us who have a conservative viewpoint or Christian viewpoint, by and large, I mean, some do get through, but, like The Terminalist, with Chris Pratt and stuff, there's some that do get through, but those are special cases. And so what I've seen and what I now believe and support, and the other thing was I'm like, well, you create this separate parallel economy of Christian movies or conservative movies. And it's like,
Right.
you're not really interacting with the world, blah, blah, blah. But now that you don't have any other choice, you won't make a movie if you are. So you have to. And what's happening is we're getting more guys in there and we are getting more of these movies made. I think Angel Studios is an amazing example of this where, there's a lot of bad Christian movies, but look at The Chosen, and like, I don't even
It's a popular
necessarily the little bit I've seen of The Chosen wasn't all that inspirational. I mean, it was good, but it
one.
wasn't great.
Yeah.
But I recognize that it is great to a lot of people, and people are loving it. And then the new movie Sound of Freedom, it was rejected literally by Hollywood. They sat on it for 5 years until Angels got it away from them, and now it's making it's going to be making $100 million. That's the kind of thing that. Fine, if we can get going in another realm, we should we have to do it. The Daily Wire started setting up their own studio of making movies, and they've got a handful of movies, and they're all pretty good. They're not cheesy, bad conservative propaganda. They're just great stories with a little bit of a conservative view in there. And so there is room now for that. And the Christian space is getting better. I still sometimes I'll go and I'll watch a Christian movie and it's still, oh gosh, I thought it was getting better, but now this is so bad. But there are still some good, pretty, okay Christian movies coming out.
Sure.
And I even have to admit that some of them have come from studios, like Affirm Films, which is, a Christian label of Sony Pictures. They came out with that several pretty dang good movies with Christian themes in them. And in fact, they've even bought a couple of my scripts that I've written, one on the story of Ruth and one on Jesus, actually. We'll see what happens with those. But there's still stuff that does get made, but the system by and large is against. And so now parallel economy is what they call it, I think is a legitimate option and people should pursue it because we'll have what it is now is we have a bigger pool of talent. When you don't have a good pool of talent, you're not going to make as good movies. But now so many of us have left Hollywood because there's no more place for us, but we're talented.
Sure.
Bingo. So, but it's a lot harder world because, movies have to be smaller, cheaper. We don't have the big distribution mechanism that helps movies get out. So it's a lot of hard work and suffering. And to be quite frank, it's like I wouldn't want to be a producer. I wouldn't want to be one of those producers myself. So
sure.
But
just think about it though. There's all the garbage that I think it's just a contradictory view, right, of the redemption of God, really. But to have people come in and tell the real story, even if it's small to start, it's like I feel like it would grab people to actually be curious about the Nephilim. Like if somebody would come in and actually make a movie of your flipping books, I feel like it would blow the door wide open because there's so much there, there's hope, but there's also accurate portrayal of what was actually happening. And but I think it's because eternity is in the heart of all men. It's it would awaken the destiny within people. It would awaken something. Well,
and like you saying that the eternity in the heart of all men, it's like the redemption storyline that's been in all these movies for all these years. There's some about that, whether it's Jesus or not, there's redemption that it sparks people, and they may not know what the core of it is, but it's there somewhere.
Yeah.
And almost like, even like with music and stuff, it's like rock and roll showed up and like was extremely offensive, but it changed the game completely. And it's like, you got the left side of this thing, and then you got Daily Wire, right side, conservative stuff. It's like these two bickering, let's throw rocks at each other kind of thing. But it's like, forget all that. Good story.
Yeah.
Something seriously redemptive and just like quality, like talent. I don't know. That may spark up somewhere.
No, it is.
Cool
it is. It's percolating because I know people who are doing that very thing. As a writer myself, I'm not as involved in that. And I'm focusing more on my novels now. I still write movies. Cool. In fact, I had my latest movie came out last year called My Son Hunter, which was a political satire about the Hunter Biden laptop. And, the writing's really fantastic. I think the writing's really good, but it was a tough movie to make because anybody involved in it would be completely rejected by Hollywood. We actually got some named actors in there. John James used to be on Dynasty, and of course, the guy plays Joe Biden, and then the guy who plays Hunter Biden is Lawrence. Forget his name, Lawrence Fox. Sorry, and Lawrence is a great English actor, but he's lost his career because he's gone outwardly political, expressive of his conservative views, and so he's lost his career in Hollywood. But he joined the movie, so people who don't care about, who are willing to, and then Robert Davi directed, and he's kind of been in Hollywood forever. He was a Bond villain and stuff, so he was an actor, and then he directs this. So there was a lot of us there who were, were rejects of Hollywood and stuff. So that stuff is getting made.
Interesting, yeah.
But
Hollywood rejects. That's
that's pretty much
it's a name.
Why don't you start a publishing company?
Man.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
So the guy who the producer at Daily Wire is Dalasanya, and he used to make these sort of a lot of horror movies, very successful, and also he'd make these sort of small, gritty, harsh movies, crime and stuff like that. But with stars like Mel Gibson in them, right? Cool. So they were low budget, but he was able to get stars in them, and they tended to have some conservative values in them. But now he's the one who's heading up the Daily Wire, and they are seeking to. They're not seeking to do conservative propaganda. They want to just do good stories,
Good.
Now, of course, if you have a conservative worldview, that's going to come through, but they're not out to make propaganda. And I respect
one
that.
Cool, for sure. And one cool thing they did as well was they brought in, what's her name she was on The Mandalorian, Star Wars.
Yeah. Gina Carano.
Yes. I really was appreciative of that. That was awesome. And she's like even directing some of their movies now.
Yeah, she starred she didn't star, but she was in my movie, My Son Hunter, too. So.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, well,
that was super cool.
Yeah. And I like her. She's awesome.
The few famous people who kind of get canceled, the conservatives all glom onto them. Be in my movie, so then they get in all these movies.
That was cool because they did her so wrong. She deserves.
Yeah. Too bad.
Yeah, that's cool.
Too bad too, because that was a role that she was really fit
she was
for.
great.
I don't think she's necessarily fit for a lot of roles that she's been in, but she's definitely fit for that for sure.
For sure. Well,
it's a bummer.
Yeah, I know it. But who knows what's going to happen though? I'm hopeful about it. I'm almost like sitting back eating my popcorn. Like I'm kind of curious. Of course, I write my stuff, but we'll see.
Because if you think about it, God did that from the get-go. Like as everybody projected their own, like the gods did their own deal, like he always came through on stuff and he kind of showcased. It's like the game didn't change.
Tying it back in to even imagery and like imagination and stuff, like King Nebuchadnezzar with his dreams. Who interpreted that? Daniel did.
Yeah.
What did that do? Even going back to like Daniel, our pastor says about like the three wise men.
Yeah.
Following the stars. Like was that passed down through what Daniel did? Did they learn that from did Daniel change the culture?
Because he operate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
Anyways,
I love what you're doing. It's so cool.
Man, it's cool.
I'm so glad that you could join us.
I feel like I've had I've seen your books before, like in passing and stuff. And I'm like, oh, what's that? But like now you're like on my on my target list, and I'm like, fascinating. I was talking
You
to
got
a
to go
friend.
through all of them, man.
Yeah, I was talking to a buddy this morning about like the Nephilim Chronicles and stuff, and we were talking about, because I've thought about doing that years ago, like somebody needs to do this.
Yeah.
Make a movie of it.
And you did it. And I think that's what's so cool too about you is for people that are fascinated with this, and like you, Michael Heiser, Judd Burton's another one that we,
Oh yeah,
it's like you guys are pioneers of the like bringing this stuff up
the true narrative.
so that we can, people like me and you, we can go look into it. And it's like you're trustworthy too. And you're pulling it from like history and stuff. It's very responsible. It's a responsibility, but y'all carry it very well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that,
So,
because that's
yeah.
actually an important point to be made. I think that there is a cottage industry, unfortunately.
Sure.
That's why I call it Nephilim nuts. It's sort of like there's a cottage industry of Nephilim nuts where, you know, they're writing tons of books, and you know, a lot of them are into all, like we're in the end times and all this kind of stuff, and then Nephilim are coming back and all this goofy stuff, and so there's a lot of stuff that I actually don't support. I'm closer to Michael Heiser. He was, my work is more expressive of his direction than the stuff out there. So there is some goofy stuff out there, I have to admit, just like every denomination has to admit they have their goofballs, you know, so or they're extremists, right, you know. So so it's important to understand that not all of it out there is very helpful or very good, but you're right, we want responsible, and my goal is to be responsible in it. So what I do is actually, for each of my books, I either put a appendix in the book that expresses or explains the biblical and historical research behind it, so
cool.
people can see he's not just making this stuff up. Here's what it's based on, and Christians appreciate that, because, and I appreciate that because I'm a Christian too, and I'm, you know, if I would see this stuff and not know where it came from, I would go, this is crazy, right? But it turns out that Christians have loved a lot of that, and then now I'm to the point where I write whole booklets, like a complete booklet on the research behind each novel.
Cool.
And so, for instance, you'll have, like, if you buy the Moses novel, you'll see in the book it says, get the book with the research behind this, and it's called The Spiritual World of Moses in Egypt, and then you can get the biblical research on it. Well, lo and behold, I put a lot of that biblical research for the novels into a separate book called When Giants Were Upon the Earth, and it's about my best-selling book ever, and it still just outsells everything except for Noah, maybe, but because Christians just love, and it's basically my take on the unseen realm type of thing. That was my unseen realm book, so to speak. Cool. And so I appreciate the fact that a lot of Christians are interested in this, and they're learning a lot of it. So you're right. I think we're in a changing time where Christians are sort of waking up and seeing this supernatural component that has been suppressed in a way by us, and then also as well connected to these end times views, where it's like, you know, Christians have to wake up and realize that what they've been taught is one view. It's not the Bible. It's a view of what the Bible says, but there are multiple views within the body of Christ that by orthodox, godly scholars, etc.
Absolutely.
And we've got to get out of this absolutist, polarized view where it's like, oh, you don't agree with my end times view, you're a heretic, you know, because I get that.
Yeah.
Totally.
And they just, you know, so in some ways, I think we're in a dangerous time where Christians need to learn to, and I know because I've been
let go.
Let go. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But I've been the recipient of a lot of the ignorance that, like, Christians have said just about the most stupidest things I can imagine. Christians have said.
And
I'm ashamed that that this is how they think.
Yeah.
But my goal is to try to be gracious and helpful, and to try to be patient, and to try to communicate this stuff. And so, you were mentioning about the book. So I think now's the time we should also mention that.
Yes, absolutely.
All my books, go to Amazon.com. Everything's exclusively on Amazon. That's the way I'm able to actually make a living, is by having them on exclusively on Amazon. And all my books, almost all of them, are in paperback, ebook, or audiobook. And you just type in Brian Godawa, you can get the author page and get a list of all the books on Amazon. Or if you want to look more into me, you can go to Godawa.com, Godawa.com. That's a website that I put together that I want. it's a really interesting one. I wanted to make it valuable to people that go there, not a waste of time. So I've got a lot of, I've got descriptions of every book, but I also have I've casted characters in all my books. I've got pictures of the characters in all the books and novels. And I also offer a lot of free scholarly articles about the material that is in my books, so that people want to get the scholarly basis of it. They can read a lot of those. And I don't even agree with everything I post on there. I just here's some multiple viewpoints about this interpretation, right? So that I provide that kind of stuff for people to draw from and to be helpful.
So cool.
Excellent. Brian, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah,
like this is a new world that I'm excited to like delve into, especially being a writer and just everything. And the cool thing about all this, the Nephilim and all these incredible stories that encompass the entire world and everything, is like, it for me, the most valuable thing is like, it shows how heroic Jesus is and everything he did for us. Like even the flood, like saving us, like protecting us from, in our lineage, the pure, all this stuff, and everything that he did, getting up on the mountain, flexing, on the gates of hell and all these. And it's incredible. But thank you for carrying that responsibility, like doing these kind of things for us.
Yeah, it's very
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. If you enjoyed this episode of the Ancient Way podcast, drop us a like, share with your friends, share with your family. And if you'd like to support us and what we are doing, and you would like to play a direct role in our growth and things that we do in the future,
we have a donation spot at the bottom of our show notes. So you can click on that, give however much you want. We appreciate absolutely everything. We appreciate our listeners. And everybody that's already come alongside and encouraged us, and even everybody that's been on our show. So thanks, guys.